Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, I'm with a very special guest. I'm with Tiago Forte. We've been following each other's work for years now, but it's the first time ever we meet in person. And we're going to talk about a lot of things that we both care about: note-taking, note-making, creativity, productivity, and his book. So welcome, Tiago. Thanks so much for being here on the channel.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So first things first. For a lot of people, note-taking sounds like a boring thing. You're probably reminded of being forced to sit in a classroom, having to listen to a teacher who's maybe a little bit boring, and trying to write down as many things as possible because you have an upcoming test. So what about you? What's your relationship with note-taking, and when exactly did you get interested into it?
Yeah, let's see. I was never a good note taker. I wasn't a good student. I was a mediocre student all the way through college. I didn't do it right. I didn't see the point. I loved to learn. I loved to read, but I wasn't good at kind of the rote memorization that note-taking in school kind of implied or required. And so, I don't know, sometimes people think I was like just a dedicated young note taker. I really wasn't. You know, where it really started was a chronic medical condition. It was really health. When I was around 22, I came down one day for no apparent reason, just out of the blue, with just an unexplained like pain and tension in my neck, in my throat. And to this day, I still actually don't fully know what it's from or what caused it. But with the US medical system, when you have a chronic condition or one that's not explained, it's like a part-time job. You get in the mail every week paperwork and forms. You have to take notes. You have to write down what all these different specialists are telling you. You have to cross-reference it. You have to go do research. But then not only do your own research, please take that research, check it with your doctor. There's all this work. And I remember, being 22 and thinking, I just wanted to live my life. I wanted to go on adventures. I wanted to experience people and places. And I needed a system to just manage all this medical related information in a way that didn't take up all my time and all my energy. And then once I had this general purpose note-taking system, as I talk about in the book actually, I just started applying it. I applied it to go serve in Ukraine in the Peace Corps, to live overseas where I was an English teacher. So I would use it to organize and plan my lessons for my English teaching. I used it to apply for my first job. I used it to start my blog and then to outline and kind of plan the content for my blog, use it to start a business. So after all these experiences, I kind of just arrived at the conclusion that this was something that wasn't just for one use case, like in school to pass a test or to write an essay. It was something that could be used to solve any kind of problem.
That's amazing. Basically a way to pass the biggest exam that we all have to take
Yes.
continuously, which is life, right?
Yes.
So wait, all of that, whether it was what you did in the Peace Corps or applying for jobs or your blog, all of that was living into the same note-taking system?
No, it definitely evolved greatly. And this is something I always like to highlight is I've had to switch multiple times. I mean, it started on paper. Then I was doing it, this was way back 15 years ago. So I was on Microsoft Word, if you can believe it. Then I was on Google Docs, and now I'm on Evernote. Evernote, is kind of getting older, so I'm now looking at the next generation. So it's like there's a through line there. There's a second brain kind of principle that was always at work, but the platform has had to graduate from one technology to the next.
I really like this. I'm a big proponent of building systems and following general principles rather than trying to stick to a specific tool.
Yeah.
This is actually a good mark of a good system if you can take it and translate it to a different tool and it still works.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What about now? What does your current system look like?
My current system is centered around Evernote. I'm an OG. I'll be the last Evernote user. I'll be there at the headquarters just knocking on the door. But I've been using that for 10 years now, which is kind of wild.
Wow.
But I also have I think of it as this like constellation. Evernote is like the sun. And you have the planets and the asteroids and the different planetary bodies, which are like Instapaper as a Read Later app, Things 3 as a task manager, BusyCal as a calendar, Notion as a kind of general content manager. That's more for the team, more for the company. And these days we've also started using ClickUp for team task management.
That's amazing. I know that quite a few people who are watching this channel are already familiar with your work, but for the benefit of those who aren't, can you explain what exactly is the Building a Second Brain method and how does it work with your own system?
Absolutely. So a second brain is it's a system of knowledge management. So imagine at the most basic level, you have too much to remember. I can pretty much just declare you have too much to remember. So we talked about this in our other conversation before, ascending to more advanced levels of, cognition. What I tell people is get the bottom 30%. What is the stuff you're just trying to memorize? You're just trying to remember, just trying to keep track of. Storage, memory is something that technology does much better. It doesn't forget, it doesn't sleep, it doesn't lose track of things like we do. And so it's really an extension of your memory on the most basic level. And that's kind of the gateway. That's the entrance, right? But then once you start doing that, you start discovering things such as, well, now that I've offloaded that 30%, there's kind of 30% at the top that's free. And what tends to happen with that is you use it for creativity, for imagination, for collaboration, for creating new things. And that's where it starts to go from kind of mere storage to these more unexpected and kind of surprising possibilities.
That's amazing. So it's not only note-taking. This is a difference that I make. We've talked about it before, but that's something I was very curious to ask you about. I keep on telling people, and you probably know this, that I don't think that pure note-taking in the sense of just capturing information without processing it is that helpful when it comes to understanding and recalling information, at least in a useful way where you can actually create your own content out of it. So what I advocate for is note-making, where you rephrase things into your own language, where you really make it your own when you connect the dots. How does that work in the BASB model?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm completely on the same page. It's funny. What I like about note-taking is it gets people on the first rung of the ladder. It's like, if I say building a second brain and personal knowledge management, the average person goes, that's not for me. That sounds like some weird, dorky, geek thing. Whereas note-taking, it's incredible how deep in our culture note-taking is. The word note in English is among the 2% oldest English words.
I didn't know that. That's amazing. Okay.
Isn't that wild? It's ancient. It's an ancient word. It's not a technology thing. And, commonplace book, the word commonplace comes from the ancient Greeks. Some of the earliest writing, like on Babylonian stone tablets, are actually notes. It's not like an essay. It's like how many bushels of wheat I had and then a running count of, the bushels of wheat in my storehouse, like 3,000-4,000 years ago. So it's like something that is almost in our DNA, it's in our culture, it's in schools, it's in families, it's in the way we think about work, about learning, about reading. So it's kind of a great introduction. At the same time, when I say note-taking, it takes sometimes people a while to realize I'm talking about something totally different from what you've experienced in any other context. It's just completely different. It's lifelong instead of just for like one semester, one class. It's digital and therefore networked and in the cloud and on different devices, not just on, a little notebook in your pocket. It is highly collaborative, not just for your own personal use. It is surprising and unexpected, not just like writing down what the teacher told you. So pretty much on every dimension, it is radically different from what we know. And so there's kind of some pros and cons of the term note-taking.
Okay, sounds like your approach to what you call note-taking is what I call note-making.
Yeah.
So I think we pretty much agree on this. But despite all of the benefits that you just described, most people are just taking what I'll call mindless notes. Yeah. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
Why do you think is that?
It's the legacy of school. You were told what to write down, for what, the test, the paper. It was a punishment orientation. If you don't, these bad things will happen. There was no assumption or even possibility that what you were creating was a lifelong learning asset for a lifetime of learning and projects and exploration. And so I find a lot of what people have to do is unlearn. They have to unlearn this kind of just taking received authority, what someone in authority told me to do when it comes to note-taking, and they have to learn to listen to their intuition. The word intuition and resonance is all over this book. Basically, what I just discovered through teaching people and coaching people is you can't do this process analytically. It's too energy intensive. You know, analysis is great, the intellect is great, but it takes energy. It's that critical, you know, prefrontal cortex that is very kind of, it's very rational, but very energy intensive. You have to use your emotions. You have to use your somatic awareness. You have to use your intuition. You have to use something that is more bodily and more natural, which again, our culture is all about cut it, especially smart people, especially, you know, people who love to learn. We're sort of cut off right here. Everything that happens below the neck is kind of not of interest.
Wow. It's true that we're always trying to intellectualize things so much that we don't think about the massive impact that our emotions, our energy levels, and all of these things, as you say, that happen below that level.
Yeah.
The way they impact all of our creative thinking, our productivity, all of our work, really. And despite the importance of these aspects, we just ignore them, basically. So there's definitely a need for a shift in mindset when it comes to collecting information, connecting the dots, and then creating our own content, going from that mindless note-taking that we've inherited from all of those years spent in school. We need to unlearn that and move on to something where we unshackle our creativity and our thinking. Is that what inspired you to write the book, to help people shift their mindset?
Yeah. And, you know, this is where you've largely pioneered. I was starting to get interested in this stuff. I was getting into personal growth, self-awareness, emotions, but I was at a point where I wasn't sure if it was okay to talk about. Am I going to get in trouble? Are people going to be freaked out? We have such this fear, again, among intellectual, smart people of woo-woo. So allergic to it, right? But I live in California, and I had, you know, access to certain circles in LA and San Francisco. You just can't avoid this if you spend enough time in California. And I my own life was taking me in that direction. And so I felt this tension between my life and my work. But then you came along and you were able to say mindful productivity, and you were able to talk about mental health. You were able to balance these different elements in a way that gave me permission to do it. So I feel like on that path, I'm kind of following in your footsteps, because you proved that people could handle it, that they wanted it, actually, that in fact, there's this overwhelming kind of need for it and demand for it.
Thank you so much, because I've been really inspired by your way of thinking in public and of even writing in public, the way that you use Twitter to just share your thoughts and then use the feedback that you get from people to incorporate it into your articles and really co-create your content with your audience has been a big source of inspiration for me. So I'm glad that being a little bit more mindful of our mental health and emotions is something that made its way into your work. So I just love that we've been helping each other, even though, again, it's the first time we're meeting in person. So I'm very curious about the whole book writing process, because even though the Building a Second Brain system is a proven, very solid system, you've had thousands of students use it. So, you know, great, and I do, you know, believe in it. But it's a whole other kind of project to write a book, a proper book. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you applied your own system to write the book? Did you just use it straight out of the box? Did you have to tweak it? How did that work?
I absolutely used my own. I had to. In fact, it was kind of the ultimate test. And there's this funny thing where we've all heard the advice, oh, if you have a big challenge, break it up into smaller steps. Everyone knows this. We've all heard it. Here's the issue. The reason we don't do that generally, the reason that that's even something we have to think about, is when you break a big challenge into smaller pieces, you then have to manage those pieces, right? That's more individual things to keep track of, more details, more steps, more dependencies, more, you know, how this thing depends on that thing. So I kind of think in order to take that advice, you need an external memory system. You need a second brain. And that's what I did. I just got, so there's one thing before that actually, which is I'm always advising people to do small projects. Very small, quick, iterative projects, short ones. Don't do a 6-month long thing where you're only going to learn something after 6 months, where you're only going to show something to someone after 6 months. Do 1 week, 2 week micro projects. And then so some people come back and say, well, you wrote a book, that was a 4-year long project. You're not following your own advice. But it's almost like The reason you want to do small projects most of the time is so you have the room and the flexibility to once in a while do a big project. I think of it like a great work. Everyone, at least once in their life, should even just try to do a big work, a great, see what you're capable of. Try to climb the mountain, whether it's a literal like Mount Everest, or writing a book, or writing a play, or building a building. It could be anything, but just it's just one of the most precious things in life. And so I'm able to write this book by the fact that in the other parts of my life, I have, these small projects.
There's probably also something to say about the fact that when I look around me and at incredibly smart, creative people who've done those kind of big projects, those big projects are actually building on top of a lot of smaller projects that they've done before, right?
Exactly.
I recently purchased an encyclopedia of psychoactive plants. It's 1,000 pages long, and all of it is basically a collection of the work of the author that they've done over many years before. Wow. The photos are photos that they took over many, many years. It's not photos that they took specifically when writing this. Yeah. And I imagine that for you, for writing the book, you didn't just sit down in front of a blank page and went like, what am I going to write about? You had all of this work, and instead of building on the shoulders of other giants, you kind of built on the shoulders of your own previous work.
It's so true. Yeah, it's so funny because, I'm a first-time author. First-time author, okay, that sounds like, oh, I just decided, one day recently to be an author. But the manuscript that became this book is the 8th version. It's the 8th version of this manuscript, going back almost 5 years. Before that, it was based on a course that's been taken by over 5,000 people. So that's almost like another 5,000 kind of validations. And then before that, and along kind of in parallel, I've self-published 9 ebooks. So first time, and yet so many time, right? It's you keep laddering up. You keep making a bunch of small blocks, combine them into medium-sized block, combine many medium-sized block into a big one. And that's how you de-risk it. I cannot fathom spending 4 years of my life with this as my central focus, 4 years of my peak productive years. It's 10% of my life I've been working on this, almost. And I couldn't do that unless I had validation and proof all along the way. Every little micro step that it works, that it's effective, that it impacts people, and that ultimately the book will be successful. I need almost a guarantee before I'm going to commit to all that.
I love this. It's basically iterative creativity as a guarantee for success. I think a lot of people could use that. And I think it also makes it less daunting, right? A lot of creators are asking themselves, where do I start? And they try and go for the big project straight away.
Yes.
But by doing it the way you're doing it, is just instead of having this big mountain, you can take little steps, see where it goes. And whenever you're ready, you can take the next step. And then all of those steps are still here when you're finally ready for climbing your own Mount Everest.
That's the key, is it has to exist in concrete form, right? Because it's when you go back even to, I think of these as building blocks, which I also call intermediate packets. I go to some of them, I'm sure this happens to you, even from 6 months ago, and I'm like, wow, I don't remember hardly any of these details. I could never recreate this piece of writing now, even though I still kind of know it. It's how I think of it is each stage of your journey has a unique kind of value. The later stages of your journey are not better than the early stages. In fact, there's certain benefits and things about the early stages of my journey I miss. I wish I had savored. I wish I had appreciated instead of just passing the time and trying to get to the next stage, right? You don't realize, let's say you're just starting to write, you can try anything. You have nothing to lose. You can say whatever you want on any subject. No one has any expectations of you. Do you know what kind of freedom that is? I'm jealous of that. And so the key, I think, is really that it's external in a trusted place that you can find it. And also, I think it has to be somewhat in public, right? Building blocks in your notes in your private storehouse are just not the same as something, like I said, that's been validated, proven along the way by other minds. Other human minds are the ultimate test, right?
Is working, learning, creating in public something that is absolutely core to the building a second brain method?
I think it is. It just depends what you mean by public. For a lot of people, sharing it with one other person counts. That's the public. That's someone else. It's someone that is going to tell you their opinion. It's someone that forces you to communicate it succinctly. It's someone that's going to add their own ideas, right? And that might be terrifying. In fact, it probably is. The first time you share your work, your writing, whatever it is with another person. But then it can expand from there. Start with one person, but then it can be your team. It can be your family. Start with people that are going to be relatively favorable, and then over time, you build your courage, and then actually over time, you seek the people that are going to be most critical, right? I think of it like concentric circles. You just keep expanding until you just build enough self-confidence and enough courage and enough willingness to be proven wrong that you want the biggest possible audience who's going to be the most critical, because that's just going to accelerate your rate of learning the most.
This is exactly what I did with my own audience. My newsletter used to be only colleagues, former colleagues from my previous job. And little by little, I opened up and let other people join. There was something so reassuring and freeing at the beginning.
Yes.
And knowing that everyone on my mailing list were people I knew who were just going to be kind to me. And only once I felt ready to get a little bit like harsher criticism, I could open it up. So I think there's something really important in what you just said here, and I'm just going to reiterate it for people watching. But if you are hesitating and you don't know where to start, an audience of one is still an audience. So start sharing your work. Even if it's just your best friend for now, that's the first baby step that you can take to start building your audience online.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's make this a little bit more interesting, because I know that we agree on a lot of things. But there's one thing we've been recently debating together and we have slightly different opinions on. And this is the note-taking archetypes. So last year, I came up with 3 different archetypes for the kind of personality that people have, note-taking style that people have. And these are the architect, the gardener, and the librarian. And very recently, you posted on Twitter, that's where all of the debates happen, that you thought that one archetype was missing and you added a 4th one.
Yes.
I'm not going to say which one because I'll let you explain and we can talk about it, but can you tell us more?
Yeah. So the archetypes, by the way, this is such a great example of how the internet works, because you tweeted that. I'm guessing it took minutes for you to come up with, or I don't know, maybe you thought about it for a couple days. That we took that, made our own changes, made our own modifications. That has become a central pillar of our business. We now use it in our course to basically categorize people, to split them into groups.
Amazing.
It's become like the onboarding flow to our whole program, which is kind of wild. I wouldn't have come up with it. I needed to see it. The second I saw it, I thought, oh, this is it. She got it. She nailed it. Except I had to add one. So basically, briefly, in my own understanding, architect wants to create the ultimate system. They want the all-encompassing framework that everything can be fit into, just like a building, just like an architect will make, a giant blueprint of how everything fits together. The gardener is kind of the opposite. They want to kind of explore and discover and plant all these little idea seedlings and watch them sprout and grow and interconnect, and they're just like in wonder and full of imagination, and everything is very bottom up. The librarian, which is the archetype that I associate with, is about sort of collecting, capturing from many different sources, organizing it somewhat, but focused kind of like on research or on like specific projects or specific things they're trying to learn. So in a way, they're kind of in between the other two. And the one I added is student. And the reason I think we wanted to add one is sort of as a catch-all. Really, it's for all the people who thought the 3 others were too complicated, who said, I'm just trying to like write a grocery list. I'm just trying to like write down a few quotes. I just want to, I don't know, jot something down on my phone. I don't even have a computer in some cases, which is surprising. So we kind of created this miscellaneous category. We wanted it to be very approachable and accessible. So we said student, not like a student in school, but a student of life, a student of learning. And so that became our 4 archetypes.
But don't you think that all I told you I was going to disagree. Don't you think that all of the other ones are also students?
Yeah.
Because in their own ways, whether you study through building a system or through tending to your garden or through organizing your library, ultimately, you are a student of life.
It's true. And it's honestly a little confusing for people because they think, oh, well, I'm not in school. I already graduated, so I guess I'm not a student. When in fact, sometimes it's the people who are not in school and thus are the furthest from school, have the least familiarity with technology and digital note-taking. So ironically, they are the most likely to be a student. It's kind of confusing. You're totally right. You know, there was another motivation for us to add the student, which is what I'm trying to do with my book. Maybe the number one goal is to introduce people to knowledge management who have never heard of it. That's like, it's like a bridge. It's like I'm an ambassador from the world of digital note-taking, those of us who nerd out about it, spend all our time or a lot of time thinking about it, to people like, you know, I always think of my parents who just don't care. They're just trying to like solve basic problems in their life and lead a good life, right? And so the student is kind of, like I said, it's a miscellaneous catch-all. Like if anything I'm saying is overwhelming, think of yourself as a student. You're just a novice. You're just learning. So then we just sort of like put you in this fourth category, which is kind of a miscellaneous group.
Oh, I think I have a way to align the way you're thinking about it with the way I'm thinking about it. I would not see the student as a fourth category, but I would see it as an entry point into one of the other three categories. So with the way you're describing it, for me, a student in your way of dividing those groups is someone who hasn't figured out their archetype yet.
That's true.
So that's the way I would do it. And it's interesting because in the original article that I published, where for the first time I coined those three different archetypes, I did have at the very end of it a list of tools that for me don't fit any of them. So for the archetypes, I mentioned Roam, Obsidian, Locksec, like these types of network thinking apps for gardeners. Notion is something that I mentioned for architects because it's a lot more structured, very helpful for systems. And I mentioned Evernote for librarians. And at the very end of the article, as I was saying, I mentioned that some people, they only use Apple Notes or Google Keep, and that it's fine, but that it's not really fitting any of the other archetypes. And I think a lot of the people that are going to read your book, they're probably going to be in that category. But if they want to start applying the principles of your book and they want to really start to capture, organize, distill, and express their ideas, they will naturally at some point want to upgrade their system. And they will find that Apple Notes and Google Keep are not enough. And they'll want to supplement that very kind of like mindless, quick capturing system with something that is a bit more thoughtful. Do you agree?
I think you're right. You know, I wish I could say, yeah, Apple Notes. You know, if you think about Apple Notes is probably by far, along with just the other default notes apps on Android or whatever, the most dominant, you know, note-taking app in the world because it's on every single one of the 1.5 billion iOS devices. I wish that was enough. I wish that you could just, it's like the digital equivalent of like a sticky notepad, right? But you're right, it's not enough. It's enough for capture. And in fact, it might be a really good initial capture solution because it's so frictionless and because people are already doing it, right? Like I find if someone is even, say, keeping a grocery list, that is like the seed. You can be like, oh, right next to the grocery list, just hit the plus and create a new note and write down a quote that you heard. This is mostly what I spend my time thinking about these days, is the on-ramp. How small can we make the steps? How easy of a curve can that be? But I think you're absolutely right. You need a more sophisticated solution if this is really going to qualify as your second brain. Your second brain, that's a high bar. That's an achievement. It's something, you know, quite powerful, and it needs a sophisticated piece of software.
Exactly, because when you think about a second brain, just even your first brain, it's not only about adding information to your memory, it's about being able to recall it, to make connections, and to be able to then create your own output from that input that you added to it. And obviously, anything like Apple Note or Google Keep is not going to be able to do that. It's almost like a short-term / working memory tool.
Yes.
That's just able to help you in the moment to get a task done.
Yes.
But that's not going to help you with long-term creative projects.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's one piece of the solution. I always have to repeat this endlessly, that your second brain is not one piece of software. Because if you think that, you're going to look for the silver bullet. You're going to look for the one magical solution. It's really this ecosystem. It's this constellation. You know, even you who are really quite dedicated to Rome as your second brain, that's really just the centerpiece of your second brain. You have these other supplementary tools and habits, and even a bookmark that you coded with JavaScript that sort of, they're like these accessories to your second brain.
Absolutely. And I do still use Google Keep, right? So I do agree that you can't really rely on just one tool. Obviously, you need to avoid the shiny toy syndrome, having a lot of different tools and making it overly complicated, and where your creative system paradoxically gets into the way of your creativity.
Yes.
But very often you will need different tools for different kind of jobs.
Yeah, it's very true.
So just to recap your journey, you went from hating taking notes, absolutely hating it, to now having a whole second brain that you've used to write a book, which is not a small feat, right? What advice would you give to people who are just getting started? The kind of people who, in the way you're framing it, are students, or in my way, are still trying to figure out what their archetype is. They're very new to this. They don't really know where to start. What advice would you give to these people?
Yeah, I have a couple things. So first I'll say what to not do. Don't say, I'm going to stop everything and I'm just going to spend weeks, months, years creating the perfect system, and then I will learn, and then I will write, and then I will create, and then I will present, publish, build, whatever that means for you. Instead, the way I think of this is like, you know what is actually the hard part about taking notes? Leading an interesting life. That is actually the hard part, right? If you don't have an interesting life, you have nothing to take notes on. If you are leading an interesting life, and I think you are, everyone watching this is leading an interesting life. I mean, aren't you? Aren't you traveling places, meeting people, learning new things? Aren't you curious? Aren't you interesting? Aren't you intellectual? Aren't you multifaceted? Of course you are. So you're already doing, in some way, like 90%. You're living the life worth taking notes on. All I'm saying is to just add a little 10%. And a way to do this, you know, over the 15 years I've been doing this, I looked recently, my average rate of note-taking is 2 notes per day. Wow. That's it. 2 notes per day. And a note is small. It can be 1 sentence, 1 quote, 1 image, 1 bookmark. It's 1 little just snippet. So start with 1, okay? I'll give you an easy 50% level and see if you can for 30 days. I think this is the critical mass. For 30 days, try to just take 1 note per day, no minimum size. At the end of those 30 days, look at the inbox or the daily notes or whatever the capture tool is. Look at the sum collection of those 30 or more notes and tell me, just try to tell me that there is not valuable knowledge, valuable expertise, things that could really impact people's lives, things that could solve problems in society, things that could solve problems for people you know. I dare you to tell me that. I'm sure that once you see it outside your head, you're going to be amazed at just how much happens in just a single month of your life.
That's beautiful. And I agree with you. Everyone is living a life worth taking notes about. Thank you so much, Tiago. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Tiago, where can people find more about your book?
You can find out everything you need to know at buildingasecondbrain.com.
Thank you. We'll put the link in the description so you can just click on that, have a look, order it, read it. I read it and it's amazing. Trust me. Okay, Tiago, bear with me. It's a bit weird, but I finished all of my videos with this little brain here and I go squishy, squishy on camera. And since you're the first guest on the channel, I want you to do it. So go ahead and you have to just go like this and go squishy, squishy.
Okay. This feels like such an honor. I love this brain. This is a perfectly sized and shaped brain. You guys ready? Here we go.
Let's do it.
Squishy, 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 squishy.